Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another great episode of Crushing Strongholds. This is a podcast where we turn pain into power, trauma into triumph, and a place where we get to expose the lies of the enemy. And how do we do that? We do that through testimonies and we do that through faith. We do that by talking to people that have overcome and encountered strongholds of their own. Today, I have an amazing guest. And a guest I'm thankful for who's very patient with me and in my podcasting career. But this gentleman, Jake Doberenz, I know I was going to say that wrong. Jake Doberenz is a
hmm
writer, a speaker, a podcast producer focused on keeping the spotlight on Jesus, which I love. Absolutely love that. He hosts Christianity Without Compromise, a podcast that calls Christians back to authentic, Christ centered faith. Jake also likes to write Christian nonfiction and fiction. He holds a degree in biblical studies and theological studies and produces podcasts for mission driven organizations. So, Jake, welcome back again.
Oh, yeah, thank you for having me again in some ways, or part two. Um, Not part two for everybody else, but part two for us.
Yeah, well, it's still a joy. So I'm glad, like I said, thank you for coming back and joining in with me. And so, Jake, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, what you do, who you are, and just fill in some of the blanks about who Jake is.
Yeah, I mean, you summarized me pretty nicely, but as the bio revealed, man of many hats. I was going to say many talents, but whether or not I'm talented in all those subjects is debatable. But definitely somebody who tries a bunch of different things and wears all those hats, like I mentioned. So, yeah, in my life, I have just constantly been sort of searching for my thing, and the main kind of current, the main thing that's tied everything together is want to talk about Jesus. I want to write and teach about that subject that I went to school for, as you mentioned, that I'm really passionate about. And so that comes out in a bunch of different ways through podcasts, through my weekly newsletter, Smashing Idols, like through all those things. That's just kind of what I get to do in a variety of formats, whatever the format of the year is, whether it's podcast this time or books this time or whatever. Who knows? Virtual realities next, maybe, probably not, I don't know. I get to just talk about these topics that I think are really important and come at it with an angle that I think is unique. I try to get more under the surface on some of these issues, maybe more than others, and talk about, the idols and the things like that that hold us back, that sometimes we don't even realize that we are focused on something that isn't Jesus.
Yeah. What would you say is the biggest idol that you have discussed?
Oh, well, my absolute favorite one is to talk about the idol of efficiency. It's one of those things, right, where it's like it's not bad to be efficient. There's to farm with big farming equipment means we can make more crops than if we all just went out to the field ourselves and started harvesting the corn or whatnot. Like, so efficiency isn't bad, but by golly, do us, especially Americans, especially those in the West, we get caught up with, we got to take all the shortcuts. We got to make everything easier. Like, please, like, I don't want to have any kind of pain or frustration. We have kind of villainized in our society discomfort or pain or frustration as just objectively bad, as something we have to overcome. And I think the gospel kind of says not necessarily. Like, there are ways that pain teaches us, right? And discomfort is often where Jesus is found, where we can really, when we lean into those areas and really preach the gospel and be the gospel to people, be that good news. So, yeah, that's what I like to talk about a lot, that people don't think about a lot. It affects everything. Um, you know, uh, when we talk about AI specifically, it falls into all those categories. Uh, when we talk about, different kind of policies we want in the government, when we talk about how we organize our churches, we're a little too obsessed with the efficient path, and we forget that we're supposed to strive to the better path, the Jesus path, which sometimes is a little efficient, but oftentimes not even close.
When I think about that, it reminds me of the story of Mary and Martha, because Martha
Mm,
was so efficient. She had to get everything done in order. It was very structured, routine. And then here's Mary sitting at Jesus' feet. Martha's getting agitated with her.
sure.
And Martha's just sitting at Jesus' feet. And Jesus is like, this is right where I want her to be. And I think Jesus wants us all there sometimes, but we are so busybodied and we are looking for the next, hey, what's out there, what's happening, that I think sometimes we forget that stillness and that quietness in the night where we're sitting at Jesus's feet. We miss out on part of our intimate relationship when we kind of set that on the back burner, and then we don't run to it until we absolutely fall into a place where we absolutely have to have it. So I literally could see what you mean by that. I think
Mm,
about that when you're talking about Christianity without compromise. I know that, and I really want to get into this kind of with you today. I'm hoping you're like, whew, open and ready, because the compromise,
let's
like,
go.
I know, like in churches, and there's so much compromise in the world. We're altering biblical teachings based on morality. We're operating on, even in the morality, the sexuality in marriages, our socialisms, all of that. We're altering the biblical teaching around it instead of aiming for the relevance of righteousness. And I think that in those compromises, um, not necessarily doesn't mean that we're still not seeking Jesus, but I think that we're putting him um not in the spotlight where he belongs. Like you said, he belongs right in the spotlight. He's the center,
Mm.
not what you're going out to create or what you're trying to figure out, but what does Jesus want in all of that? And what do you see, or what have you noticed when it comes to compromises? What about the churches? Have you seen compromises there? Because I know people talk about a lot of compromising in the churches, and this isn't like to degrade any church or anything, because I think churches have their own way. But I think that sometimes when we compromise, we leave things out. And one compromise, just my personal take, and I want to get your opinion on this, is we don't hear a lot of pastors, stepping on toes, like getting down
Mm.
to the nitty gritty of things. We're kind of bypassing that, and we're making it a comfortable, cushy, here, let me get you a latte, put your feet up, let's relax, let's worship. And that's all great. Jesus isn't against that, but we're not talking about some of the important topics in churches because we're keeping people comfortable. Have you noticed any of that in the churches lately?
Yeah, I mean it's a tricky thing. When I talk about that word compromise, it doesn't always mean, like if the church happens to match up with the world on something, that doesn't necessarily mean it's compromise. Like there are good truths and goodness in the world, and but for sure there is a lot of distractions, and sometimes I think the issue is always wanting to have it both ways. Is usually where that compromise comes in some way, shape, or form. We want Jesus and this power. We want Jesus and you know total sexual freedom or whatnot. Like, and that's where we get into a problem. I sometimes tell the story of when I was visiting Guatemala, and I was on this tour of this little town called Santiago Atlan, and the tour guide took us to see this um, Mayan relic, this Mayan idol, literally that some people still had worshipped. And when we walked into this room to see this Mayan god, he was the god of parties, cigarettes, and alcohol. Fun guy, I'm sure. And immediately when we walk in the room, you see this funky looking idol, like a legit actual idol, and then you do a quarter turn to the right, and there was kind of this ceramic looking Jesus figure, sort of like laying in one of those glass coffins, like Snow White was in, kind of thing. And that always struck me. It's like we're trying to have it both ways. We got the party God, and then we have Jesus, the Son of God. And so that's where compromise often comes up. And to talk about preachers specifically, like um, I there's definitely a problem with some people not wanting to challenge the status quo, step on toes. I also feel like we have the opposite issue where we're trying to step on too many toes, and also Jesus, it cannot be just funneled down to the love and accept everybody, but also isn't the guy that's trying to bash people with the Bible or something all the time. Like we're so extremists in our world. We have to go all these different ways. Um, but yeah, like Christianity is a little less popular than it once was, and that has led some people perhaps to say, okay, we got to make this a little bit more palatable. We want to have Jesus and here. We want you to kind of keep your life sort of how it is, but add Jesus in there. That is a much more comfortable proposition than to say Jesus is your whole life now. Everything's changed. I mean, yeah, you can. There's still parts of our lives. We can keep some of our friends and hobbies and jobs oftentimes, but when you're on Team Jesus, everything is supposed to change. It's not Jesus and it's just Jesus, like period, exclamation mark kind of thing.
Yeah, when I think about that, I think about like, especially when you're talking about like I always call it Bible thumpers, like we
Mm,
don't want to be someone that walks around and is just pinging someone over the head with the Bible constantly because we're
100%.
just going to point out every flaw, mistake they make. Because I think some of the reason Christianity isn't so hype and so big sometimes is because the non-believers also see Christians messing up all the time. And so
Sure.
there's some miscuity with that because they're like, hey, you're supposed to be this glorified Christian, and here you are making mistakes. And so people look down on Christians for that. Or you have Christians that'll tell you, hey, don't do this, but they're doing it themselves. And so you kind of like you got to be careful not to walk that line either when as a Christian. But what about as far as entertainment goes? Like there's a lot of
Mm,
entertainment in the world that we look at and we love entertainment. Like we love movies, we love pop culture, we love songs and video, we love podcasts. I mean, this is a
that's
form
right.
of entertainment. It's exciting. I
Uh-huh.
love doing this. I don't know about you. I love it.
Hmm.
But do you see that, sometimes the teachings and the principles to the teachings are not as truthful or not as it doesn't have a deepened theological teaching to it because we are dabbling in so much of the entertainment world, is what I guess I'm trying to say. I don't know if I made
Mm.
sense with that.
I will say that I do believe in the power that um,
Talk about.
everything shapes us. Everything shapes us to some kind of extent. Um, Sometimes again back to extreme. Sometimes we exaggerate that. Like if I read XYZ, if I watch this, I'm gonna go worship Satan tomorrow. Okay, hold on here, hold on.
Right.
But nevertheless, entertainment is all shaping us. It's telling us this is what's normal. It's telling us this is what is good. This is how to behave. Whatever it is, it shapes us. And I think there are some people that maybe have a kind of fortitude that are not shaped by things. That doesn't necessarily mean they should engage in all those things, but I'll give an example that I've given before. Like, um, using bad language is not a temptation of me. Like that, I just in my core, I don't use the bad words, and that's a whole other discussion of what defines those words. But generally, I got a clean mouth. That's not a problem with me. So if the TV show has a little bit of cussing, it doesn't really affect me. I'm not going to say those words. That's just not who I am. That's not my nature. That's not my issue. Whereas something else might affect me a lot more or something. And then somebody else, maybe that language does affect them. So um I think we got off from your question a little bit, but my point is always, yeah, something like entertainment shapes us, and it takes a good bit of discernment to figure out what kind of messages those are. I have a friend who's a movie critic, and he does this from kind of a Christian perspective. Works for a variety of different publications. Religion Unplugged is one of them, and writes for all these other places. And I had him on my podcast long time ago, and kind of asked him to defend. Like I said, I straight up asked him, "What good are movie critics for the world? Like, why do we need you to tell us about movies and stuff?" And he made much a similar case here. He said, "I want to save you guys some time from maybe watching something that isn't good for you, whether it's like literally just poor quality or it has messages here that might just shape you in the wrong way." So I said, "Okay, fine, good job. You defended your job. You can be a movie critic. That's fine." Um, and so when it comes to whatever kind of entertainment, watch out. Like watch out. That is a major message in Scripture that we can't just go about life and not be critical of some of the things that are trying to speak into our lives.
So if you know that or you're in, let's say you know that this is happening, which we know this is happening, and you're in a position where you're seeing something, it's really bad, and as a Christian, do you ever feel obligated to just share, or do you just keep it to yourself because you think, okay, it's not bad, it's bad for me, but I'm just going to let you make your own decision on this. Do you ever think
Oh
like that?
yeah. Well, I do, and in fact, like as of the recording on this, I'm preaching this Sunday on well, through several spots in First Corinthians, but kind of focusing on First Corinthians 8, where we have this discussion of meat sacrificed to idols, and how Paul starts the whole thing is by kind of getting on their cakes about knowledge. You might have some knowledge in here, but he says, do everything in love. Like the most important thing for you to do is not to be right, it's
Right.
to not cause somebody to stumble, to be loving here. In many translations, right at the beginning of the chapter, will say, knowledge puffs up, love builds up. And that is always the key to all of this is what am I going to do that is actually loving and not just I'm right, guys. I have the knowledge. I got a couple degrees, or I see something that you regular Christians don't see, kind of thing. Bad attitude. Can't do that. Um, but yeah, absolutely. In practice, what love looks like can depend. Not everybody's favorite answer, the it depends answer. But I think about things like, do I have a relationship with these people? Are they going to listen to me? Are they going to laugh at me? Um, those are some of the considerations in there. Not to say that, never speak the truth. Even in if somebody might laugh at you, kind of thing. But I do think about like, is this going to be the most loving message, or is this going to make them be like that Jake guy is just a little too weird and things? Um, like trust me, I have some really passionate convictions that as loving as I try to be, sometimes that still pushes people away. Sometimes they say that is too radical, not for me, and I don't know what to do about that. I mean I can't do anything about that. I cannot control other people ultimately. I can just strive to be as loving as I can, and if they receive that poorly, that's between them and God at this point. Like that weird meat sacrifice to idols discussion. A little hard to translate some of that to today, but their point was some people were bothered by something, and other people weren't. And instead of Paul saying who's right and wrong, mostly what he was saying was just be loving, and whatever you do, don't cause somebody else to sin. And I think that is going to be a good guiding principle, even though the food sacrifice to idols maybe not isn't the hot button issue in our congregations today.
Yeah. So is that your quote? Knowledge puffs up, love builds up, or is that somebody else's?
That is
'Cause I haven't
a
heard that before.
that's a translation in First Corinthians chapter 8. I believe that's verse 2 or 3. Some one of the Bible translations says it like that.
Oh,
Uh,
okay.
yeah,
Oh, so it's actually in one of the Bibles like that. Okay.
it's
So
in the
I've not
Bible.
read that one. Not in that manner anyway.
Yeah, for a whole book of First Corinthians is a good reminder of like slow down, guys, on your knowledge. Um, that famous love chapter, First Corinthians 13. That's kind of the climax of the whole thing. Is like this is what we strive to be, not just the smartest guy in the room, which is always a good lesson for me.
Yes, yes, I can relate to that. I don't ever really try to always be the smartest or the funniest or whatever.
Mm,
Um, I just want to be genuine. Try to be as genuine as I can, to myself and to Jesus, and not in pursuit of um, trying to correct somebody per se. But again, just trying to deepen their relationship with Christ, and again, showing those fruits that we're supposed to be showing. So that's kind of like, where my heart is on that type of, or on that
mm,
topic. But
yeah.
um, when we think about the individualism in faith, treating the Bible as a subjective text for personal interpretation rather than absolute truth. I was reading that, And it also says, and reducing the importance of regular corporate worship. I'm wondering if in our faith that which I don't have a I don't have a problem, but I wanted to ask you because I listen to like Phil Wickham. Do you like Phil Wickham? His
Yeah, I've heard his
music?
music. Yeah.
Okay, he's got good music. I listen to his words, and I love worship, and then sometimes I'll hear like on the backlog somewhere, oh, you can't follow Phil Wickham. He's not a true Christian. I'm like, oh my gosh, how could you say that?
Mm,
I think we sometimes we get so politically religious sometimes that we actually start judging people, and we think that we know their actual walk when we don't. And
mm.
like sometimes, like me listening to Phil Wickham, I would hate for someone to say, "Well, you're not a Christian. You're not a true Christian." And so it kind of, kind of sometimes sits in the back of my mind when I think about it. Do people ever depict, whether they think I'm a true Christian or not? For one, at the end of the day, it's not going to matter what they think because I stand before God at the end of the day, not them. But I always have that thought in my mind: how do we come up with those things in our culture that we live in? How does that become to where everyone's debating all of these different people, like this person's Christian, this person's not a Christian, and they're singing Christian music because they're on a platform or because they're entertaining? I don't think it makes them less of a Christian per se for myself. So what do you think about that?
I mean, for sure, it's like, boy, I got to be careful about the circles I draw and telling God to do God's job.
Hmm.
Not something we should probably do. Um, I grew up very passionate about my faith, and I was a minority even among Christians. The religious Christian tradition I grew up in, um, even had a reputation for calling a whole bunch of other Christians wrong. We had a we had our small little circle, and everybody else was kind of off base because we happened to interpret everything correctly. It wasn't everybody, but that was a common enough kind of thought in that strain. And so that took some getting out of, and one of those was just going to college and realizing that there are really faithful Christians who do not think like me. And that was crazy. I didn't know that was a thing. But again, it comes right back to that First Corinthians. It's like, no, God, the actual supremacy, the actual most important thing is love, not the knowledge, not all the correct everythings. Now, a couple caveats here, like that doesn't mean we ignore orthodoxy or things like that, or truth and knowledge and stuff. No, by no means. But we're always, as human beings, going to draw some lines that I just don't think God is drawing, and there's a lot of uncertainty. And I just kind of choose to err on the sides of, um, if your fruit is good, right, this is one of Jesus' metrics here. Come on in, hang out, like. But as soon as you start producing some really nasty, rotten fruit, hatred and anger, and and sin, and whatever else, the anti fruits of the spirit, then we gotta have a conversation. Then we gotta talk here. But yeah, this is an incredibly important and uncomfortable conversation that Christians need to have. But too often, I think we have erred on the side of excluding others, and maybe it's okay that we have some different opinions here. I still believe I'm right on pretty much everything I believe because I believe it. So of course I think it's right, but I have to leave some room for changing my mind because I've changed my mind. You've probably changed your mind. The listeners have probably changed their mind on something. We all have to be open for maybe we're not 100% correct.
Right.
So that's my hot take. There you go.
Well, I like it in First Corinthians 10 where it talks about, taking every thought captive to the knowledge of God.
Mm.
Um, but what you're saying is making me think of this, and it just hang out with me here for a second. So like John 3:16 says, "For God so loved the world, He gave His only begotten Son." It didn't say, um, "For God so loved knowledge that He gave His only begotten Son," that, or He loved
Uh,
the smartest that He gave, or He loved the most whatever, fill in the blank. The word is love. And so that's why I loved it, when you're talking about, the knowledge, it does puff you up. It makes you feel, like you've gained something, you've learned something. When you have knowledge, you are bettering yourself. But
Hmm.
also love is such a powerful spirit that it holds more, like you said, the compassion, the it's more intimate, I think, than knowledge. Like we can have a room full of people that are very knowledgeable and none of them even like each other in the same room. But to have people in a room that care and love about each other, it's going to be a completely different ambiance, basically. Does that make sense?
Hmm.
So if you
Yeah.
think, I was just thinking, I don't know why John 3:16 popped in my head where it says, "For God so loved the world." It didn't say he loved the smart people and the smartest person or the
That's
dumbest
right.
person in the world. He said he loved the world. Period. Point blank. That's in. End of line right there. So I
Hmm.
love that you're sharing that because it brings things into perspective. Because sometimes when we look at things, and I've had people say this to me, and I don't know if you've ever heard this, because I'm like you. I'm a believer, and when I believe in something, I kind of stand up to that. And
Hmm.
it's not that I'm trying to thump people or think I'm smarter, because I'm not. I don't think I'm smarter than anybody. I think we all have ability to learn. We just learn at different rates, different paces, and some people have different interests in what they learn in. So I don't think anyone's smarter or stupider than anybody in Earth at all. I just that's how I've always been. It drives me nuts when people say, "Oh, you're just stupid." I don't think anybody's stupid, but I think we can act stupid, we can behave stupid, but I don't think we are stupid. I do also think that when it comes to compromise, I've had someone say to me, and I don't know if this has happened to you, are you a cherry picker? Do you just cherry pick what you want to? And I'm like, am I a cherry picker? Like you want to adhere to this, but maybe not so much to this scripture. And like you said, the knowledge is important, but so is the love. So some people, I don't want someone to go, oh, you're just cherry picking because you're picking, love is more comfortable and cushy and knowledge is more, you have to get ingrained and you have to understand, like the book of Proverbs, there's so much knowledge. I mean, Solomon, man, there's some power behind that knowledge. So I don't know if you've ever had anybody, or even have you even heard that expression, like, do you ever cherry pick the Bible? But it really baffled me when somebody said, do you cherry pick? And I'm like, do I seem like I cherry pick? Because I'm kind of not sure where you're going, you know?
Hmm.
And I think I'm just more passionate, like you said, in areas of the Bible more so than other areas. But that doesn't mean I don't love the Bible from start to finish. I'm not trying to leave any of it out. I may not, maybe I just don't have as much knowledge in that area as the area that I'm constantly referring to, if that makes sense. Can you relate with any of that?
Well, for sure. I mean, in my theological education, I took a class called systematic theology, right? That's that fancy term for like, all right, let's make it all work here. And some of that project is awkwardly a cherry picking scenario because we get a little bit of there is no like chapter and verse that lays out the Trinity or whatever. There's not, like, we don't get all the explanation here. We don't even truly get like, here's exactly how salvation works. We have to kind of piece some of this together because a lot of times we're reading other people's mail in the Bible, right? They have different concerns than us. So there is an extent in which we're all gonna a little bit pick around here because nobody sat down to write a textbook in the Bible. That's not what they were thinking about doing. They're writing stories. They're writing mail, like I said, where they're addressing particular problems. So, on one hand, let's be real, we all do that, and on the other hand, I think that for me, like, I will prioritize Jesus over some of the other parts of the scripture. But I think that is a legit thing that we have on purpose done for the last 2,000 years, where we realize that Jesus is the truest, best revelation of God. And not to say everybody else is wrong in the Bible. I'm not, wrong is not the word I would apply there, but the clearest revelation is Jesus. So, yeah, I've been accused of being a cherry picker because I like Jesus and some of those words in red, as some translations put the words of Jesus in that red text. But that doesn't mean I ignore everything else. It just means I just think logically we gotta have some kind of system going on here, and that's gonna put some things as more priority than other things. I don't know.
Right. I agree. I totally agree because, like I said, for me, it's like like you said in the beginning, the passion and kind of like where your heart is with
Mhm.
Jesus. And I love to talk about Jesus. I could talk about Jesus all day long. I love also talking, when people ask me about the Trinity, and I said, well, read Genesis. Read Genesis. The Trinity is right
Mhm.
there. And it starts in the very beginning of the book of Genesis. And they're like, no way. I'm like, yeah, it says right there. It said God made us in our image. Who is our? He's not talking about himself in the first person. So who is our? It's Father, Son, and the Holy Ghost. I mean, there's different topics that people will jump into, um, if they ask me. But again, I always come back to Jesus always because I just love talking about Jesus. I like the letters in red, so I'm glad that you brought that reference in too.
Yeah, yeah.
I always say I will reference the letters in red as well because sometimes it makes it easier for somebody to find the text that they're looking for and the address and certain scriptures. So I'll say, okay, if you're looking in this scripture, it's the one, it's the verse written in red, So I kind of use that, to help people navigate through the Word of God as well. So I like that. Those Bibles that have everything written in red. But so as far as this or this podcast being about crushing strongholds and
Yeah.
getting over that, like getting over hurdles and obstacles that kind of hold us back from our God-given purpose, I believe that some people sometimes we don't sit or operate in our gifting because we're either unknowledgeable is one reason. I don't think it's always just because of something that's traumatically happened in someone's life. But what advice, for our listeners before we close up here, what advice could you give to those that are struggling with a stronghold that they just feel like they just can't they just can't go any further. They can't take that initial step in trying to figure out what God's given purpose is for their life. And some people are like, what do we really know what our purpose is in life?
Mhm.
I believe God gives us all giftings. And I believe that we are all called and we are all ordained. We are all designed and created in his likeness and in his image. And I believe that we can either sit idle because we're afraid or we don't have the knowledge, or because something in our past has triggered us to where we can't overcome. So, what would you say to our listeners today if they're facing a stronghold and they're just not sure how to overcome that?
Yeah, I mean, if you're facing a stronghold, number one, gather the troops. We are
Amen.
not doing this thing alone. And
Yes.
I think that is underrated in our individualistic culture. You mentioned that earlier. We are in a culture that just, man, has this image of, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, even though if you had straps on your boots, you can't actually pull yourself up, and there's this notion that we should and can do everything by ourselves. No way. Bring a team, get some people together, Christians assemble kind of thing.
Hmm.
And that is why in scripture we find these plural uses of like some people joke like be translated y'all. Paul would be talking to y'all
Hmm.
if you were in the South. I'm here in Oklahoma, so I occasionally
Yay.
say that word. Um, but the vision of the Jesus people is in community. You talked about giftings too, right? We are the body of Christ. Each of us is a different part here. We need each other. Um, I mentioned earlier when comes to something like entertainment, some things I'm stronger at and some things I'm weaker at. Well, I need to partner with somebody who I have strength when they're weak, and where I'm weak, I need somebody that's strong in that area. We need that diversity. Too often, I think, I don't know. This is a something I've observed many times in church. Like we get all the people together that are, um, addicted to pornography or something, and they all try to help each other, but they all have the same problems. Like, what are we doing here? Nobody's getting better, and so we need to have some people in our corners that have overcome that or don't have the same struggles, whatever that might be. People, people, people. That's the answer. If there's a stronghold in our way, we got to gather the troops and take this thing on together, not alone. Because 9 times out of 10, we're going to fail on our own, or it won't be lasting, or we won't find ourselves on that path of purpose.
This is an amazing absolutely perfect answer. And I love that you said that because before I started Crushing Strongholds, I had obviously some strongholds of my own. That's what led me to this podcast where God kind of um, navigated me into this course. Never thought I'd be a podcaster, and here I am. So, but it took me taking a little bit of step of faith and reaching out to somebody, and I didn't even reach out to like my best friend or like some a family member that's really close to me because I felt like they knew me too well. And they knew me so well that I thought they might actually just tell me kind of what I want to hear and not what I really needed to hear, if that makes sense. And not that I wouldn't have
Sure.
appreciated that, but I felt like they were going to coddle me in a way that the healing wouldn't come. I would stay stuck in it. And so I literally made sure that I outsourced to an individual from a church that I went to that I had watched and paid attention to what she had done, and she was already ministering to women that were struggling, and I was watching outcomes as well as what she was doing, and I reached out to her and I went to her for coaching, and now I'm a coach. I'm a life coach. I do what she does,
Mm.
and because it was really amazing that she was able to sit me down point blank and be like, here, I want to meet with you, but I'm not going to let you waste my time, and I don't want to waste yours. Let's get to the root of this problem. What is the problem? And we talked about it. We prayed about it. We were, we even sat and listened to music sometimes and just worshiped and just sat and meditated on the word. And it was so powerful. But had I not reached out to someone, I would probably be still stuck in that stronghold. And some of the strongholds that we addressed were some of the strongholds that I didn't even know needed addressing until I sat down with this individual because it kind of brought things to the surface. And I think God does that. He brings us people that bring some of our problems to the surface so we can fix it. Like you said, if everyone's watching pornography, we're not going to help each other. We're just going to tell people how to
Hmm.
find it, where to get it, and what to do with it. That's not the answer. That's not going to solve the problem. That's going to create a huge travesty, I think, amongst people, and definitely would not be the place to go get help. But so I absolutely love that answer and agree wholeheartedly with that. And I just thank you
Yeah.
so much for actually just saying that. Um, I say it a lot that people need to join the forces. Even when I do podcasts, I will say I'm joining forces with this podcaster because that's what we're doing. We're coming together for the kingdom of
Yeah, I
Christ,
like that.
sharing
Yeah.
Jesus. And I love that there's power in that. And we can join, your ideas with my ideas, and it makes it a little bit stronger than us doing it alone. So, on that note, would you tell our listeners again about your website and how they can reach you before we go into our closing?
Sure. I hang out on Substack a lot, kind of that newsletter-ish blog platform. I don't know what you want to call it. Just jakedoberenz.substack.com. On Fridays, I come out with the Smashing Idols newsletter, that imagery kind of similar to your show. And that's where I have something written. And on Tuesdays, I come out with a new podcast episode of Christianity Without Compromise. I'll tell you, I had a long time listener to my show talk to me about Christianity Without Compromise and say, I've liked every episode except this one episode. I really disagreed with that one. And you know what? That's okay. Like we're gonna have conversations. Some people will disagree with some of it. Um, but I try to be pretty picky on who I have on that's trying to center us on Jesus, on Christ. And there is a little bit of toe stepping. I'll admit that, right? To bring us back to something at the beginning there. There's some toe stepping. That's okay. We'll have some good conversations along the way, and maybe people can appreciate these other perspectives.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
that's me.
I think it's definitely important to have a little bit of toe stepping because I think that sometimes we need to be not only just redirected or focused, but we need a reminder. And Jesus Christ is our reminder. I was talking to somebody in content to validation, and a lot of people are seeking and searching to be validated. And what I said was, I remember feeling that way for a long time in my life until I finally realized that Jesus validated me the day he went to the cross. And from that moment on, I decided I didn't need to seek out validation from so many other people because I already had validation for Jesus, and that in itself needs to be enough. And so I think it's amazing that that you are picky and that you do bring specific points to the table because there's a lot of things that don't get addressed and there's a lot of things that get overlooked sometimes. And I'm glad that you're kind of the guy that's going, you know what, we don't talk enough about this, so hey, let's talk about it. And why not?
Oh,
Let's
for
bring it to
sure.
the bring it to the table and, get some perspective and get some ideas and get some, and people get healing from that. That's what this podcast also does. When we start having these conversations, I've seen people share their testimony on here and people get healed from them, from hearing someone else's testimony. And it's wonderful because, especially with, it seems like lately, a lot of the people that I've had on here, one thing that they said that just really, is very moving for me is they said, I had it all figured out, but I didn't have anything figured out until I surrendered it all. And
Mm,
and I've had them say several people say this so many different times, so many different ways. And I think it's interesting how we hang on to stuff and we don't let things go. But once we surrender it all, then that's when God can do the work in us. If we don't,
sure.
if we got all these
Yeah.
walls, it's a blockade of stuff. Jesus can't work. We have to lay it all down so God can get to our heart. So with that being said, I want to thank you so much for coming back and talking with me again. What a great conversation you brought to the table
Yeah.
today. I love that you're not afraid to talk about compromise. I love that you're authentic. I love that you want to keep Jesus in the spotlight, and which is right where he should be. I always say, who's your number one? Jesus number one. Jesus should be number one.
There you go.
Number one
Yeah.
player on my team. um, he's number one in my book. But anyway, for all of our listeners, again, um, if you want to reach out to Jake, you can reach him. I will put all of Jake's information into the show notes, like I always do. And also for anybody that is struggling with a stronghold, like what Jake said, hey, get with someone. I'm a life coach. You can reach out to me at
Mhm.
crushingstrongholds.com. I offer free clarity calls and I also offer prayer. So, with that being said, Jake, I want to thank you so much for coming back. It was a pleasure. And do you
Yeah,
have anything to
absolutely.
say?
No, thanks for re-recording this after technical difficulties. Appreciate you still thought, I want to have that conversation. So love it. Thanks so
Yeah.
much.
Well, it was great. I really enjoyed it. And I thank you for your time and for being here and for all of our listeners. I hope that you take care and don't forget to like, share, and follow our episode so that we can get the word of Jesus Christ out there. And just know that you're loved and have a great day. Y'all take care.